The other day, I found something. Something I probably shouldn't have. I worked as a park ranger for the San Bernardino County National Forest in California. All my life, I'd wanted to be a ranger, ever since I first saw Smokey Bear and his preventing wildlife commercials on TV. I'm not a ranger who usually leads around groups, though on occasion I have. My main job is to look out for the wildlife and lead search and rescue teams if a hiker gets lost. Recently, on a rescue trip, I had found a couple who were lost climbing back up the ridge from a steep stream climb. It was miraculous that I found them at all. The only reason why I noticed them was because I saw something in the distance that I had noticed before. It looked like the corner of a gray building, and when I peeked over to get a better view, the woman spotted me, and I called the rescue helicopter to help on the radio. From what I could tell, the man had fallen off the side of the ridge and slid down into the creek. I looked for a way down, and eventually found a safer way, but it took me about 10 minutes to walk around safely just to get to them. By then, the helicopter was just arriving. He looked like he had fallen on his ankle pretty badly, and best case scenario, it was probably only fractured. I told him he was going to be okay, and I helped him and the woman onto the chopper. As we took off, I looked around the area to try and spot that building that I thought I saw. I couldn't see it anywhere. I helped bandage up the man's ankle on the way back to the medical building. Our doctor got him settled, while I went back to my office to file a report on what happened. Intentionally left the building I thought I saw out of the report. Not because I had something to hide or anything, but because I wasn't sure if I'd actually seen it. The next day, I went back to that area to try and find that same building that I thought I saw. I had found the ridge where the man had fallen. I stepped close to where he was before he had fallen, or at least my closest approximation. That's when I had seen it. The man must have also seen the corner of the building, so it was real. The weird thing was it was heavily surrounded by trees. I had not read any reports or emails about a building being out here before. I climbed down the ridge and headed towards it. I entered the thick area of trees that I thought were surrounding it when I stopped because I spotted something. I crept forward slowly, and I was right. Something was in front of me, running toward the direction of the building. As I got closer to the area, I noticed scratches in the trees. Whatever it was leaving a trail to know how to get back, or scratches were already there, and they were on their way back to the area. That would mean they were trying to find a way out, not a way back. I took my time following the scratches, so I didn't catch up to whoever it was that I was following. Finally, I had made my way to a very small clearing, and there was a door to a small shack-sized building. This was clearly out in the middle of nowhere, and had I not followed those trails, well, I wouldn't have winded up here. This thing almost kind of looked like a stone porta-potty, but only slightly wider in size. The door appeared to have a card reader on it, so it seemed like it was a security-protected building of some sort. I took out my card and tried it out of curiosity. The security panel slightly turned green, meaning that I was authorized. I opened the door to step in that led underground to a dark corridor. There was a light at the end of the hallway, as I could see somebody walking towards the end of it, and I saw they disappeared into the room beyond that. The long corridor had 3 turns to the right, and the room that was beyond it. I walked to the first one and peeked around. I saw that inside was what looked like a locker room, possibly. There were benches and drawers in there, and on the walls were full of bodysuits with a window covering to see through. There were orange suits, which I had seen before. We had used those to take care of hazmat procedures when a large animal had been dead in the forest for a while. But I've never seen it in a facility like this, nor had I even known that this existed. This almost seemed to be part of a military facility of some sort. But yet, why was I allowed in with my security clearance? We have to be careful when handling something like that because animals that have been dead that long may attract diseases that you wouldn't be able to see without a microscope. What I didn't recognize was the other suits in there. Some were blue and green, and I had no idea what those were used for. I walked further down to the next room, and I peeked in. I saw more of the suits, but inside was an actual locker room with lockers. I looked around, and they all seemed to have locks on them, but one was empty. The third door down I saw was just a custodial area. It seemed like it had more things in it than a normal closet might. It of course had the basic things, but there's some other weird stuff, like stacks of body bags and other things. I wondered if this is where they took dead animals after we had recovered them. That would make sense why they would have full orange hazmat bodysuits. I looked around the door at the end of the corridor, and inside of it was huge. The room was as large as an airplane hangar, but it was filled with what looked like laboratory equipment. I walked over to a table that was against the wall that had files on it. They were spread out haphazardly. Some of them showed descriptions of a test subject. Other papers detailed that the serums hadn't yet worked, but they were still trying to find the right sequence to fix the pathogen. Now, the thing that really struck me as odd about this whole thing is there was no armed guards, virtually nobody. I think this place was an old abandoned facility of some sort. Everything around me seemed like it hadn't been touched in some time, so I'm not quite sure how I ended up stumbling upon it, or why it still gave me access. Anyway, I didn't understand of any what it showed, but I recognized the word pathogen. It seemed to me that this was a facility was working on finding a cure for some kind of disease. At least, it might have used to. I know they told us that some of the animals might have had diseases, and that's why we wore the suits, but I didn't know it was that bad. I walked through the room, looking at all the equipment, when I noticed that the other side of the room, at one point, had caught on fire. The walls and ceiling were black with damage, but on the table was a small cube that looked like it had been untouched. It was this weird dark smoky gray color. It may have been what caused the fire. I picked it up, and immediately, I had a huge headache and began hearing very weird things. People were screaming, but I couldn't hear what they were yelling. The headache stopped, and I noticed a man in a white lab coat staring at me from across the room. He was holding a clipboard and a coffee mug, which he dropped when he saw me. It crashed on the floor, and he started running into another corridor. I ran after him, telling him to wait. I chased him to the corridor, which had offices and a smaller lab room on either side. He ran into one of the offices and shut the door behind him, locking it firmly. I asked him through the door what was going on. He said I wasn't allowed here, and that I shouldn't be here. But I told him I had clearance to get in, and that I was a ranger, and that I worked for the Forest Service, and that I just stumbled upon this place. He said I needed to leave no matter what, before it was too late. I said that I was friendly, and that I wasn't going to hurt him or do anything, that I was just exploring. He said that it wasn't me he was afraid of. He said again that I should leave while I still had a chance. Through the small window in the door, I saw him run back into the office and hide under the desk. I banged on the door, asking him why I needed to leave and what he was scared of. I started looking around for something to open the door when I saw it. At the farther end of the corridor, I saw this cloaked figure. It was the same color as the cube that I had picked up. The figure was the shape of a person, but it looked like it was made of some kind of smoke or gas. It began moving and coming toward me. It started stepping back towards the other end of the corridor. It was coming right for me. It didn't have a face or eyes or legs. It was just a figure of smoke that was headed in my direction. That's what the guy in the coat was scared of. It began coming after me much faster, and I turned to run. I ran as fast as I could to the open room and started pulling down the lab tables and equipment down. I looked back while I ran to see if that made it slow down, but this figure only phased right through them. I turned into the first hallway, thinking that I could outrun it, so I needed to hide somewhere. The lockers were too obvious, even if it did take the thing a while to look for. So I did the only thing that made sense. I ran into the first room with a stack of body bags and climbed in one, and pulled the rest of the stack on top of me. I zipped it up enough, just enough so I could see. The smoke figure passed by the room, and I thought I was safe. I heard very loud bangs coming through the other room. Whatever that thing was doing it echoing loudly through the corridors. There was a silence, and then I heard the same noise happening again, though not as loud. The smoke figure came into the janitorial room, but it didn't even seem to notice me. That must have been the scariest part. It entered the room and seemed to float around, but it didn't notice me under the body bags. I must have waited about 2 hours to make sure that I was safe. I quietly crept back down the corridor to the locker room and saw that everything was thrown about. These were easily 500 pounds each, and that smoke thing just tossed them around like nothing. There were huge indents into some of them, like a wrecking ball hit them. I looked out of the room and snuck to the first room. The same thing had happened. The benches were in half, and the dressers were thrown around and broken into many pieces. I made it back up the steps and fled. I found the trees with the markings and just ran in that direction. I somehow made it out of there alive. I don't know how I did, but I did. That night I fell asleep, trying to figure out what the smoke figure was. I had never seen anything like that in my life. The next morning, I wasn't allowed into the offices because the security had stopped me. They told me to hand over my gear and my card key. I asked them what was going on, and they said that I had been fired. I asked them why, and he said it was because of my performance over the past couple of months had been slipping, and they couldn't trust somebody like me to be leading search and rescue teams. I was devastated. I had been working there for 4 years as a search and rescue lead, and 3 years before there. I know they didn't fire me because I was slacking on work. They fired me because I saw something that I wasn't supposed to. I wanted to investigate it further, but I wasn't allowed back onto the grounds. I don't know what it was, but it was a smoke figure that had something to do with that cube. It could have been something alien, or it could have been an experiment gone very wrong. I guess I will never know, and it still haunts me to this day. Little did I know at the time, that entire area is a hotbed for government secret facilities, and somehow, I must have stumbled upon one in which I still had clearance to, in which they were abandoned.